Welcome, everyone, and thank you for joining us virtually tonight. The Engineering, Diversity, and Inclusion Council welcomes you to the 6th episode in our Walking the Walk Together panel series. These panels feature guest STEM and community leaders and are led by engineering students. It is our hope that these panels start conversations, educate allyship, and bring together all cultures and diversities to turn words into actionable steps to help move our community forward in a positive way.
This includes informing people who want to learn more about understanding their privilege and how to leverage it in allyship, as well as turning our understanding into actionable steps.
Some of our previous panels have included talking about diversity and inclusion with others outside our regular groups by Maynard Okirike in episode 2.
And activism dealing with dual identity growing up, reproductive rights versus reproductive justice, COVID's impact on social and racial justice, and using your authentic voice by Fazila Siddiqui in episode 3.
And the need for more teachers of color and more intentional hiring, and moving our values to move people to the center of decision-making by Chris Chapman in episode 4.
And also how language matters to encourage youth in STEM, representation of STEM on TV, inclusion and representation of LGBTQ+ folks in STEM, and seeing who is missing at the table and working hard to include them at the table by Frank Pena in episode 5. And those are just a few, and all the previous recordings we just mentioned here are available and posted at www.scu.edu/engineering/WTWT.
And before we continue on, I wanted to make sure I shout out all the first generation students, faculty, and staff. This past Sunday was National First Generation Day, and all this week, Santa Clara has been celebrating and highlighting our first gen community here on campus. So to all those watching, remember you have worked hard, you have earned your spot, you deserve to be here, and you belong. And with all that being said, I'll go straight into introductions. My name is Eli Gonzalez. I am a first gen student myself. I am a third year studying computer science and engineering. And I was born and raised in Eastside, San Jose. And on campus, I'm involved with the Society of Hispanic Professional Engineers, or SHIP for short.
My name is Gracelyn Chergino, and I'm a 4th year from Stockton, California. I'm studying public health science and Italian studies, and I'm involved in the Undocumented Students and Allies Association. Also, full disclosure, I'm not an engineering student. I'm just filling in for a wonderful student who couldn't make it today. So thank you for having me in this space. And you can check out both the organizations that Evie and I are involved in on Instagram at ship_SCU and SCUUSAA, and I'll throw those in the chat as well. And a few house rules. If you are in an ALSJ class, you may log this event as Arupe engagement hours. And next Tuesday, November 17th, the Arupe team will be hosting peer-led 30-minute reflection spaces on what anti-racism means in the context of our community placements. The times and Zoom links for those are in the last Arupe newsletter. And for our Santa Clara students watching on Zoom, please keep your video and microphone off for now. But the chat room is open. I invite you to use it if you have any questions throughout the event. And for everyone watching on our live stream across the world, there is a Google form on the webpage for you to submit any questions throughout the event too.
All right, and so just to emphasize, please feel free to throw any questions you have in the chat, and we'll get to as many as we can. So now it is time to introduce our amazing panelists. We're honored to have these panelists here with us today from all across the country to bring various points of view on the issues at hand. Panelists, as you say your name, it would be great if you could also take a minute to tell the audience a little bit about who you are.
So first we have Roberto Hernandez.
¿Cómo están todos? My name is Roberto Hernandez, and I'm a native of El Barrio La Misión here in San Francisco, and I have dedicated my entire life working as an organizer and causing change, institutional change, in not only here in my barrio, but in San Francisco and California and throughout the country. At the age of 12, I went to go volunteer in Delano, California for Cesar Chavez, and didn't really know what I was doing when I landed there. But after that summer, that incredible angel, Senor Chavez, fed my heart, my soul, my spirit, and my mind, and changed the course of my life. And I became a soldier, a guerrillero for him, until the day he passed. And I still, when I'm called upon by the United Farm Workers, I'm there to be of service. I have worked on immigration reform, have worked on police reform, education reform, and done a lot of juvenile justice and prison reform work.
Perfect. Thank you, Roberto. Next up, we have Deuce.
Hello, guys. My name is Deuce. I am a native of Oakland, California. I'm born and raised in Oakland. I am a musician. I've been in music for about 15 years, maybe a little bit more. It kind of switches based on the day someone asks me. I started off playing basketball. I now coach basketball at Oakland High School, and I am an A&R for Front Page Music, which is Damian Lillard's hip hop label, and just an advocate for our people and what's right in the country and in Oakland specifically.
Thank you so much, Deuce. And next up, we have Dr. Ellen Ochoa.
Hi, I'm glad to be here. I spent 30 years at NASA as an engineer and then as an astronaut, including as the first Latina in space, and finally ended up as director of Johnson Space Center in Houston, Texas. Although my first job with NASA was at Ames Research Center in Mountain View. I grew up in a suburb of San Diego and went to San Diego State, did my graduate work at Stanford. So I did spend about 10 years in the Bay Area, either in school or working. And now I've retired from NASA, but I do a variety of things, including I'm chair of the National Science Board and on a few other boards as well, including a foundation that supports fundamental science research.
Thank you, Dr. Ochoa. It's a pleasure to have you here. And unfortunately, our fourth panelist, Gabrielle Antalovich, had a personal emergency, so won't be able to join us tonight. So we'll just have three.
Now we'll sort of just dive into questions. And these questions are really for anyone. Panelists, please don't feel obligated to respond to each question, but please do feel free to jump in on any ones you're interested in answering.
All right, so again, one of our main goals from having these conversations is really meant to educate us to be able to turn these discussions today into actionable steps. So I think the most appropriate if we start off our conversation discussing a recent incident that happened on our campus, or virtually at least, at our last diversity forum regarding the Assistant Director of Campus Safety, who was in attendance at this diversity forum with a Blue Lives Matter emblem displayed in his background. And rather than acknowledging the implications and the trauma, he unapologetically defended its presence. So from the panelists, just love to hear your reactions from this. Has something like this happened in your community? And going forward, what sort of actions would indicate to you that the institution is changing for the better?
Can you rephrase not rephrase, but just repeat the last part of that question?
Yeah, so what sort of actions would indicate that the institution is changing for the better?
So you had a a situation that you were confronted with? All of you?
Yes, for those who attended the diversity forum.
Right. And you had somebody that was inappropriate. And so let me ask you, what action have you all taken?
So I wasn't present at this diversity forum. I'm not sure, Grace, if you could speak on this, but there has been little town halls to kind of discuss really and break down what had happened. And we've really just been waiting on just some administration to kind of see what they're going to do as well.
So have you all made demands?
Yeah, the MCC or Multicultural Center leaders, our student leaders, have had several talks with the administration, but from what I've heard about those, they're always sort of tense, and it's hard to change kind of institutional patterns that have been there for a long time. So we've done both, like students have both like done organizing and petitions, and kind of the other side of like Evie mentioned, like healing spaces and kind of town halls to kind of be there for the students. So yeah, there have been a couple different approaches, but it's tough. But we'd love to hear your wisdom on that.
You got to organize. It's that simple. Organize, 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 and organize, and keep organizing and keep making demands, that you feel are important to you. I'm going to give you one great example. Here in San Francisco, we've had several Black and Latino men who've been killed by the police. Maybe you've heard of Mario Woods, or maybe you've heard of Alex Nieto, and I can go on down the list, and we organize community meetings to have hold the police accountable. And the chief of police at that time, Greg Sir, would come out and put on a pony show, and it was always about, well, the police, this is how it happened, and, trying to justify killings, murder, And so we started organizing and making demands that police officers get fired, and we went to the district attorney asking them to file charges against them for murder. And so we put pressure on the DA, we put pressure on the mayor, we put pressure on the police commission, we put pressure on everybody and anybody who had the power to make a decision to impact these murders by these racist police. And as you can imagine, that's very difficult because you have institutions that have basically allowed the militarizing of the police in our communities. And we never gave up. And so after 5 murders within a period of 2.5 years, we demanded that the mayor and the police commission fire the chief. And we started a campaign, Fire Chief Sir. And we would go into meetings that the police commission would have and start chanting, Fire Chief Sir. We chased at the mayor whenever he was at a ribbon cutting ceremony or some public event. We'd show up and start screaming, Fire Chief Sir. And didn't work, but we didn't give up. In fact, there was a hunger strike. I don't know if you've heard of the Frisco 5. There was a grandmother and 4 brothers that 5 of them did a hunger strike for 17 days, and it became a national, news. And they almost died. And we took them, finally, I was able to convince them to march from where the hunger strike was to City Hall and just go inside the building and take over the building. And over 10,000 people showed up to that march. And we went inside City Hall and we took over the building, and we chanted, fire chief, sir. And a week after that, an African-American woman who was pregnant was shot by a police officer and died. And that just was where we were all, and I'm talking about thousands and thousands of people. We had enough. And we once again, did a demonstration, and we were able to get the chief fired. And today we have an African-American who's the chief of police for our city, and is different day and night working with him than when we were working with this previous chief. So it's about organizing and making demands, and holding people accountable for their racism, and calling it out.
I definitely agree with that. For me, in terms of programs that should be in place for something like that, I have been raised and taught and grew up in a level of understanding that the police on the surface are there to protect and serve, but they are not there to protect and serve for those that aren't them, if that makes sense. To my knowledge, based on how I was raised, the police were invented to catch runaway slaves. If they are who they were during slavery, the way that they treat people of color would be par for the course. So it would be the definition of insanity for us to expect them to change their genetic makeup. The program solution that I would see that would make the most sense is to flip the narrative to our youth, to let them know that people of color do belong in positions of power, being presidents or vice presidents or judges or chiefs of police or teachers, because myself growing up, I never seen myself in any of those positions of power. So over the course of a number of generations, it makes you believe that those spots don't belong to you because all you see is white people being in those positions. I think if we set up programs to teach our children that they should be lawyers and doctors and politicians, then when it came time for them to be adults, we'd have people in those positions to be people that would advocate for us. Right now, those programs and those things don't necessarily exist because of the obstacles that are in front of us. I think a lot of that stuff just starts at home with us telling our children that they can aspire to be these things and it's possible because of Kamala Harris or Barack Obama or any other person of color that has done something great. That it's just possible. Right now, a lot of people don't believe that those things are possible. And I think that's where it starts, is just building up the belief that those things can be possible.
Thank you both so much for your responses. They mean so much, and I think you're really helping empower the SU community of students to do what it can. Thank you. Before we move on, I just wanted to introduce Gabrielle Antelovich. And Gabrielle, would you like to introduce yourself and just kind of give our wonderful audience the lowdown of who you are and what you do?
What did you want me to do?
Oh, just introduce yourself and yeah, you're fine. No, don't worry. I'm so sorry. I know internet can be a little laggy. Thank you.
Look familiar. Hi, I'm Gabrielle Antolovich, and I'm the board president at the Billy DeFrank LGBTQ plus Community Center. And I'm a longtime activist. I actually was there when Stonewall happened in 1969, but in Sydney, Australia. And we had, you know, rallies and demonstrations that are very similar to Black Lives Matter. Let me put it that way. And the reaction from the dominant culture was very similar. How's that for an introduction? So I've been at a lot of Black Lives Matter rallies and protests. They sort of takes me back.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Gabrielle. And just to kind of get everyone on the same page about our last question, it was pretty much about how at our last diversity forum, the assistant director of campus safety had a Blue Lives Matter flag in the background. And yeah, it was something very difficult to see for the students who were trying to advocate for change. So yeah, if you have any more thoughts about if you've noticed an institutional problem and spoken up about it, what actions would indicate to you that the institution is changing for the better, and how would you kind of react to an event like that? We can kind of move on. But yeah, so our next kind of topic to touch on is in what ways can we help cope with imposter syndrome and seeing lack of diversity in our areas of study? I can also put that in the chat as well, just so everyone can see it. Thank you.
Well, sure, I'd be happy to talk about that, because certainly, you know, I think as you go through engineering school, it's often that you don't see very many people like yourself. And I'm sure many people have had very similar experiences where people just don't think you should be there. And it's generally, you know, they just grew up in a culture where they weren't used to seeing people other than, you know, white males really study science and engineering, or as engineers or scientists, for example. And for that reason, either don't think you should be there or certainly don't encourage you at all. And a lot of times what I tell people is, you know, the people that really tried to discourage me weren't people that knew me at all, right? They just had an impression in their minds of what an engineer should look like or what a scientist should look like. And I didn't fit that image. And therefore that really just led to their response. But fortunately, I always found people that would also support me and encourage me. And, you know, sometimes it's friends or family. Certainly I had professors in school who encouraged me. My PhD advisors were both really, really good. And so I was really fortunate to have a very good experience there. But they were people that had gotten to know me a little bit. So, you know, they knew I brought some intelligence. They knew I brought hard work, that I was interested in what I was doing and wanted to do well in my research and whatever went on beyond that. And so they understood that I had just as much right to be there as anybody else. So I know, Edith, you talked about being associated with the Society of Hispanic Professional Engineers. And that's one thing that, you know, I didn't know anything about those groups when I was going through school. But of course, since then in my career, I've spoken for many groups like SHIP and others at a whole variety of different forums. But when you can find a student group like that at your school or at your institution, I think that's something that really helps, because then you will find those other people, you know, who you can talk to, who will support you, who will encourage you, who will say, you know, everybody feels like an imposter at some point or another. You just don't know it because they're not talking about it. And I think that can be really, really helpful as you're just, you know, going through your studies and trying to make your way through your engineering degree.
You know, I'm a first generation Yugoslavian, and Yugoslavia doesn't exist anymore. And my parents were recruited to America and Australia. And what's interesting to me is I grew up in Australia, and that first generation immigrant children are always told you have to go to the university, become a doctor, lawyer, engineer, you know, all the difficult things that they want you to do, because they want you in the dominant culture and be one of them, you know. And with a name like Antolovich, everyone knew I was from Yugoslavia, which was, you know, under the Iron Curtain of Russia. So, you know, I already heard how awful Russia was when growing up, and we still hear it today, don't we? And then the Germans invaded, and so I was supposed to hate everyone that was German, and you know, it was all ridiculous. And so I went to university twice. I dropped out the first time because, like what you were saying, Ellen, it's like, I don't belong here. I don't even want to be here. You know, it's like, no, it was all the white Australians, and I hung out with all the brilliant Aboriginal people, the foreign students from, you know, Asia. You know, it was all, and I'm hanging out with all of them because, you know, they were brilliant, and also they turned out to be activists. So I went to university twice, and then the second time I ended up being a national union organizer for the college and university students, where we brought up all the things about sexual harassment on campus, racism on campus, you know, protecting minorities, immigrants, foreign students from, you know, anti-everything. And you know what's really interesting? I was doing that in the 1970s, and the issues are still happening today. You know, it's amazing. And the one big difference I do see, though, is that I tried to get all the different fractions together, but everyone was in their own silo. And what I'm seeing now is that the immigrant movement, the anti-racism movement, the, you know, blah, blah, every movement, including the LGBTQ movement, wants to work together because we're all suffering from injustice. And it always seems to manifest on the university campus like it does anywhere else. And so I'm seeing more clubs, you know, working together on justice issues. And I'm seeing that even the institution has diversity whatevers and has some consciousness of wanting to bring diversity together, which means they have some kind of affiliation with what's going on in the world. And I have to say the Jesuits are always the best, you know, in understanding justice issues. And so, you know, it just amazes me how all of this has been going on forever, but we are now working together a lot more. I'm not saying everyone, but you know, I was one of the speakers at the Make Every Vote Count rally we had on Friday night before we knew who won the election. And every minority spoke. There were 29 organizations, and we were all talking about working together and uniting together. That didn't happen way back when, in the 70s. We were all doing our own thing, you know. And so, you know, the university is a microcosm. It prepares you for the world about how awful it is and what you can do to change it. I don't know. Yeah.
I think that this question has a lot to do with multiple facets of life. I think it fits me with music a lot. I would say there are a couple of ways you could tackle coping with imposter syndrome, because I think for a lot of people, not just in you guys' area of study, but in life, you walk into rooms where you don't feel like you belong. Like the first day of school, if you're 5 minutes late, you walk in, everyone turns and looks at you when you walk in. So it makes you feel a little bit uneasy until you meet a couple people and find out. So just to get to the options that I would have used for myself, option one being flipping the narrative of imposter and turning it into an individual situation. It's okay if you're one of the only ones of your ethnicity in the area of study because you're just the first person to do it. So instead of it being one of those things where I feel like, oh, I am feeling like I'm an imposter because no one looks like me, I'm more excited that I get to be the first one to change the narrative that my type of person belongs in this room. And the second option would be to use the evil that is social media and use it to your advantage, in a sense that a fraternity at a college is just the chapter of that particular college, but there's another fraternity just like it at another college on the other side of the country. So you do have allies that you don't normally see every day. So maybe there are only one or two people of your ethnicity at this particular school, which makes you feel like sort of an imposter. But if you reach out to all of the colleges that have this particular program, you might find two people at 100 colleges, and now you're a part of a network of 200 people that are all doing the same things. And now you don't feel as much of an imposter because you're using social media as a network to gain more impressions. With music, we always say that you hear a song and you kind of feel like, how does people like this song? This song's not good. But the reason that people like it is because the song has gotten so many impressions. If there's 7 billion people in the world and I reach 1 billion of them, the odds are I'm going to get a lot of people to like my music in the country. But if I'm only promoting my music to 100 people, the odds are very little that I'm going to get a lot of people to like my music because everyone hasn't heard it. So if you are to expand your impressions and get more people to know that you're in this group of study, then you're not really alone. You just need more impressions.
So one question I have for all of you is, do you know that there was a bill that was passed by the Senate and the Assembly in the state of California for ethnic studies recently? Right? A lot of work went into that, a lot of organizing. And do you know that the governor just vetoed it? Yes, he vetoed it. Now, you would think that here we are in 2020, and all the progress we've made, that a governor would immediately with a lot of honor and privilege would sign that into law. So my brother was just talking about, you know, common thread. That's what he was talking about, common thread, right? In different campuses, right? Right now, you all have a common thread in all these campuses, whether you're Black or you're brown or you're Asian, because they're taking away something that was fought for in the 60s. In fact, here in San Francisco State, the university here, in fact, there was, people got beat up by the police. There were riots at the university because he had, back in those days, it was called third world coalitions were built between people of color. And here was where the movement started for ethnic studies in the 60s. And here we are in 2020. Now, you would think that ethnic studies would teach everybody a little bit about somebody else and their culture, right? You would think that that would feed us, because when you learn about another culture, you begin to break down that stereotyping and that false walls and images and that fear that we have, right? So there's something y'all can organize around at the university. Go after the governor, and I bet you're going to get a lot of support statewide from all the students.
All right, thank you all for your tips on coping with imposter syndrome. Definitely, we'll take those to mind as we kind of go through school. Being the first but not the last, like you said, Deuce. Just paving the way for more to come. And I guess along those same lines of kind of just speaking on this lack of diversity in whatever area we're in. We kind of mentioned earlier, it's hard to go into something where you don't see people that look like you. So love to hear from all of you what you think of how we can get more younger individuals to get, excited or get into this any field of study. How can we just bring in the next generation?
Make education free. I'm from Australia. It was free. So was, we had nationalized medicine as well. Sorry.
Well, my experience would be pretty specific to the STEM fields, right? And I do spend a lot of time talking about this. And, there's a lot of different reasons and a lot of different things that you can do. But some of the programs that have been shown to work are, first of all, sort of dispelling some of the myths about science and engineering, and really making sure and really focusing, let's say, on middle school age, right? Because it's when you get to high school that you start to make choices about what classes you take and where you might be headed after high school. And I think in many cases, certainly this was true for me, I couldn't really have told you what was really important to be a good scientist and engineer. And I didn't really realize it was about, having curiosity, having creativity, wanting to work with a team, either to make new discoveries or to help solve challenges. And those challenges may be very close to you. They may have to do with the health and welfare of your loved ones. It might have to do with the strength and resilience of your communities, because obviously engineering and science are important to those. And you only have to think about the current pandemic and the extreme weather to realize how critical science and engineering is to understanding those and to combating them. But I don't think people say, you know, when you're 10 or 11 or 12 years old, hey, you have a lot of curiosity, you have creativity. These are awesome kinds of fields for you to go into. And I also think in many cases, they don't realize people work as teams. And oftentimes people are interested in working with groups to get something done, whatever it is. So part of it is, you know, is there some way, both in schools and in extracurricular activities, you can get kids involved in hands-on activities. And then of course, show them scientists and engineers who look more like them. So they realize, yes, in fact, people like them do go into these fields. And then probably the one other important component is, being able to have some kind of mentor, somebody who, has already gone through what they're about to go through and can give them, just be a sounding board or give them advice. And, I didn't really realize this till I was a lot older. I kind of thought you had to, have gone through a lot of your career before you could get in a position to do that. But, if you're an undergrad, you can be mentoring high school students, and high school students can be mentoring middle school students. And so you can really show that leadership at any level and sort of reach down to folks who are even just a little bit younger than you, but you've already achieved something that they probably can't even imagine. Just even being in college and studying engineering, if you're 14, that may be something you can't picture at all.
What's hard about that I was 34 years old when I came to America, and I've noticed that America tends to emphasize the individual, making it in the world, becoming rich, famous, discovering a new thing. Whereas in Australia, we're taught to work in teams, and it's a systemic thing. We, in school, it's mandatory to play team sports. And that's where we learn to work as a team, is doing it that way. And then we have to do these complicated math and science projects as a team. And so it's the team that gets the self, worth, not the individual. And it's got to be in the system, not the odd person here mentoring someone, because too many people get lost in the mix. And, there's got to be a push to be more team-oriented in the school system, starting in kindergarten and up, so that by the time you get to the university and become an engineer, you do that. My brother, he's the poor guy that had to go to the university because I didn't want to. And and the firstborn decides to reject it, the poor secondborn has to do it. So he got a PhD in chemistry, and he got to do a 2-year stint at Princeton in America. And he worked with a team to try and find a molecule that would take the medicine only to the HIV and not destroy the whole body. And after 1 year, he quit because nobody was sharing information. Nobody was a team player. Everybody, just did their own thing. So he went back to Australia, couldn't stand it. And I see so many, examples of that. Now, I'm not saying all Australians are team players. It's not true. And not all Americans are, non-team players. That's not true either. but there's an overshadowing culture. And I think people who are part of some minority, like myself, I'm a first generation immigrant that suffered all of those things, as well as being openly genderqueer and a lesbian. And, we start realizing we can't be alone in this. If we're going to fight for change, we have to not only hang out as a team among ourselves, but also team up with other justice movements in order to create change. And that means in the institutions, like at the university or at the high-tech company that you're working at, or the government that you're dealing with, whether it's local, state, or federal, it's a constant, shifting of the norm. And then one day it'll be just amazing, and it's a matter of keeping going at that, working at different levels all the time. If that makes sense.
Thank you all so much. And just kind of our closing question before we break into small groups and conclude this part of the program. What are some effective strategies you have in communicating beyond the community of people who already agree with you? That makes sense.
What was the question?
Yeah, sort of, how do we bring people in, especially people who don't agree with us right off the bat?
I can take that one first. I think that first you'd have to, I guess, identify people that don't necessarily agree with you. I think that being from the Bay Area, we are truly blessed to be in such a melting pot of so many different races and cultures. The Bay Area is like one of the most diverse places I've been to outside of New York. You can find every race that you could think of, but I think that when you go to other places in the country, you kind of know where your enemy is. They're kind of out in the open. Here, you don't necessarily know who your enemy is because it's so diverse. Like your dentist could hate you and you don't know it, but they're your dentist, and I think that communicating effectively with people who don't agree with you is probably more about just being a beacon and being such an individual about what you believe in that that people can see it on you and not hiding who you are. Just kind of speaks to Gabrielle and her fight for the community that she's a part of. I think that it's super courageous and brave, and I think that there would be no conversation for a level of justice and fight for her community if she didn't become a beacon and say, you know what, this is who I am, I'm proud of it, and overcoming those obstacles at home first. You can't be like a preacher in a church and you just talk to your congregation and the choir and then think that you're changing the world. You got to go outside to the people that actually need your help. And if Gabrielle, just to use her as an example, if she were to just stay with the people that are like her, that understand her, the world wouldn't change for the better in regards to who she is, because she wouldn't have created a beacon to tell everybody else, this is who we are and we're no different than you guys, so we should get the same equal rights that everyone else is searching for. I talk to my kids about like a lot of history stuff, and like in the Constitution, it says that all Americans deserve life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. So the idea of being unhappy is against the Constitution. It's like illegal to be unhappy as an American. So the fact that a lot of us are unhappy means that we are, as a country, breaking the very fabric of what the country was supposed to be built on from the very beginning. And I think that if we have those conversations with people about what we're supposed to be as a country, as a community, as a state, as a city, just period, we can kind of get over the classism part of the country and have those conversations, even if they're aggressive or if they end in something bad. There's no lesson in silence. We have to just have more conversations and seek out those situations. Like going back to the first question with the Blue Lives Matter flag. Like, it's great that you are doubling and tripling down on your Blue Lives Matter situation. Well, let's have that conversation. And if it turns into something bad, he's gonna walk away understanding that it didn't go good, and I'm gonna walk away going, it didn't go good, but we're not gonna just forget about it. It's gonna be something that we think about and adjust our approach for the next time we have that conversation. So that's why you see things like the hunger strike. That's why you see things like sit-ins and rioting, and because none of this stuff is solved by having no conversation. So it's just a matter of being a beacon and shining your light and making sure that someone sees that light. Just staying quiet is the worst thing to do. So like, just continue to be a beacon for yourself and your community. Even when you know that those are the people that are against you, that's the perfect place to be, is where people are against you.
Yeah, honestly, so well said, Deuce. Thank you all so much for sharing. And just looking at time, I think we'll just end off with our panelists' closing statements. So we can go ahead and start with Gabrielle.
I'm really heartened that you have this whole series going on, because you know, so many of us are very busy fighting the fight, and I think the fight, you know, I heard recently, and this is a really good one, that radical self-care is not about going and getting a massage because you're tired from being at 10 rallies in a week. Radical self-care is understanding that what we're fighting for is going to take a long time before real change can happen. And giving yourself a commitment to being in the fight on many different levels, and not burning out and not giving up and not losing hope, and keep the thread of that this is the most worthwhile thing that you will ever do in your life, is to help make the world better for everyone, not just yourself.
Perfect. Thank you, Gabrielle. And now we can have Roberto. Can you share some closing statements?
You know, it gives me hope today to be a part of you. Thank you for letting me be a part of you, because I'm an OG, and you know what? And you're the future, and you have the power to help shape the future. You have that power. It's about self-determination. It's about love and serving the community that you're from. And earlier you talked about, you know, how do we get other people educated, you know, and you're getting educated. And every young child that you can touch, whether they be in the 3rd grade, 5th grade, 7th grade, 10th grade, 11th grade. You can touch them by being their role model and tell them about your experience in the setting and in the path that you're in right now. You have that power. Use that power. Use that knowledge. Use your voice, because you can influence people. And these young people that are in your, starting with your family, your neighbors, going to school and speaking and talking about your experiences and why it's important to get an education. That in itself, you begin to influence and feed and plant seeds in the brains of little ones. I tell you, when I was a little boy, a teacher in the 3rd grade asked me what mi papa did, and I told her, well, he's a mechanic and he builds heaters. And she grabbed my hands and she goes, oh, you're going to be a great mechanic one day. And I believed her. And I became a mechanic. In fact, I would stay in the garage late at night watching my papa and my padrino work on cars. And by the time I was 12 years old, I could rebuild the whole engine, change the transmission, rebuild it. Hey, without knowing it, right? But mi mama, right? She pounded me with guilt about, we need you to become a lawyer. We need you to become a doctor. Because I was, the Latina, coming from Latin America and all the struggles. And I heard it all. And I lived with all this guilt of all the sacrifices they made to come to this country. Ay Dios mío, oh my God. It was like I couldn't live with myself because I never became the lawyer and never became that doctor, But I became who I am. And I'll tell you both, but in sus gloria, they're both in the spirit world. But I made them very proud of who I became, which is more than becoming a lawyer and a doctor.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Roberto, for sharing. And next up, we'll have Deuce.
Okay. Well, first, I want to thank you guys for having me on here. It's just amazing to get confirmation. I've done 0 days of college, 0. Like I've never went to college at all. I'm on a panel with someone who is deeply ingrained in the Hispanic community. I'm on the panel with someone who is deeply ingrained in the LGBTQ plus community. And I am on the panel with an astronaut. And I have never went to college. I've grown up believing that places and positions of power didn't belong to people who look like me. I've grown up with police officers beating up my friends, shooting my friends. Just a long list of oppression in my community. It makes you feel like you don't belong in the country, that you're here and you're working and you're doing things to like be an active member of society, but it's not a level of respected. I chose entertainment over a medical background. I am certified to be an EMT at the moment. I wanted to be a firefighter, but I felt like I could affect more lives with my voice than if I fought fires or, 90% of firefighters' calls are all medical. But I felt like my community had no one speaking for them. And I felt like my voice would be more powerful if I affected children that are super impressionable through our culture of music and sports. Like I said earlier, my cousin's Damian Lillard plays for the Portland Trail Blazers. And We both do music together. I do music with a collective called Grand National, and we are fully immersed in breeding community and flipping narratives and talking about things that make us believe or make other people believe that they're somebody and that they belong in whatever field they choose. So to be able to make my decision to use my voice as a tool to help others and get to the point where that tool has gotten me on the panel with these three awesome people without ever doing what someone else said I had to do to reach somewhere like this is super, like, I'm super humbled by that. I think it makes all the sense in the world for anyone to continue to move forward with their dreams and the things that they believe in, and to not let anyone put an obstacle in front of you. You know, it makes sense to push forward towards those things. So thank you guys, because this whole thing is confirmation for me.
Thank you, Deuce, for your voice. And lastly, we'll have Dr. Ochoa.
Thank you. Thank you for including me as well. I just think it's so important to have forums like this. You know, at Johnson Space Center, we would occasionally have sessions called The Weight of the World, and they were sponsored by our African American Employee Resource Group. And really, again, it was a place where people could come and talk and, you know, kind of try to make sense of the world they're living in and the world they work in, which didn't always seem to match up to them. And, you know, what we tried to do, you know, once I was in a position of leadership, following along with people that came before me, was try to have a workplace where people felt that they were respected and felt that they were valued. And we actually had something called the Johnson Space Center Expected Behaviors. And so this was something that we talked about in all kinds of different forums, whether it was all hands when I was directors or within subgroups, but talked about, you know, our culture is that you should be respectful, be trustworthy, be accountable, be open-minded, and be a key player. And so we would call other people on it when we felt they weren't showing one of those expected behaviors. And I think that's something that people can press their organization, their institution toward, you know, whether it's a school, whether it's a community, whether it's a workplace. Those are behaviors that you should expect, you know, at any place that you are. And that is something that you can push for if you feel that they don't really represent the culture that you are in.
Perfect. Thank you, Dr. Ochoa, and thank you to all our amazing panelists for making the time from your busy schedules to join us from across the country, for sharing your stories and helping us further the conversation on such important issues during such an important time in our history.
And thank you, students from SCU and everyone across the world, for tuning in. This event has been recorded and will be posted soon on our website, scu.edu/engineering/diversity/council. And reminder, if you're in an ELSJ class, you may log this event as Group Engagement Hours. And next Tuesday, we'll have those reflection groups and more info in the last Group A newsletter. And for all the students on the call, if you're interested in speaking more with our panelists, remember to stay on this Zoom shortly after the conclusion of this part. And the link for that is also in your SCU email sent by Ricardo Padillo Jr. And to the general public watching our live stream, we hope that you leave here today with more tools to turn our thoughts, words, in our words into meaningful action and to build up our community.
And then real quick, I want to do some quick mentions of our takeaways we got from today. You know, from Deuce, we really learned about flipping the narrative of imposter syndrome. You know, it's okay that we're the only ones, you know, we're the first. We're really the beacon for the community. From Dr. Ellen Ochoa, sharing her perspective on dispelling the myths of STEM fields, and particularly for students from diverse backgrounds.
Roberto Hernandez, he gave us insight into finding strength and organizing with persistence to advocate for justice, especially in the face of institutions perpetuating violence or halting change in education. And from Gabrielle Antolovich, she illustrated to us the power of uniting justice movements, especially when we have to battle for acceptance as an immigrant and a member of the LGBTQ+ community.
And then please mark your calendars and join again on Thursday, December 10 at 6 p.m. for our next live panel discussion featuring Emmy Award-winning cinematographer, field producer, and television presenter, specializing in wildlife and adventure documentaries around the world, Andy Casagrande, advocate for youth empowerment and programs director of the Hidden Genius Project, Akeem Brown, Director of Talent Acquisition at the Golden State Warriors and founding member of their Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Council, and co-chair of the Employee Resource Group, Fuerza en Números, Strength in Numbers, Sergio Martinez, and lastly, the founder and CEO of Dreamers Roadmap, named a champion of change at the White House in 2014, Forbes 30 Under 30 in 2016, Saraí Espinosa Salamanca. Please help spread the word and be on the lookout for promotional materials coming out on social media. And I'll just leave you all with this quote from late Ruth Bader Ginsburg: "Real change, enduring change, happens one step at a time." See you all on December 10th, and good night.